Hi everyone and welcome to today's Physics Daily Booster. This is number 3 in our Paper 2 series, and while it's not explicitly listed on that advanced information, we do know that there's no content they're not going to be assessing in regards to Paper 2. What we're going to look at today then is our electromagnetic spectrum. So the first thing you need to be able to do is recall the correct sequence of those different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum you can see in the diagram on top left. They can just give you a fill in the blanks jobby, where they'll give you some of them, you then need to fill out the others. So should be quite easy marks, just a bit of memorization needed for those. When we talk about electromagnetic waves, these are waves that consist of both electric and magnetic fields, and they oscillate at 90 degrees to the direction of the wave. So if we have a little look at the picture down at the bottom, what we can see is the red bits. Those are the electric fields, the blue bits are the magnetic fields, but notice how they are at 90 degrees to the direction of the wave. One point to remember is that all electromagnetic waves travel through a vacuum at 3.0 times 10 to the power 8 meters per second, and our sources emit them, whereas other objects will absorb them. So our electromagnetic waves basically transfer energy from sources to absorbers. If you're doing higher tier, then you do need to know about radio waves, basically how they transmit, etc. So what we actually end up with is if we have an oscillating potential difference across a wire, then the electrons are going to move backwards and forwards because it's oscillating potential difference, therefore the electrons are going to be going back and forwards because of that oscillation. As a result of that, what we produce is a changing electric and magnetic field, and that is what we emit as the radio wave. Because remember what we said, electromagnetic waves are electric and magnetic fields, and that is an example in the form of a radio wave. When that radio wave actually meets a piece of metal, i.e. your receiver stuck on your house like the aerial there, the electrons in the metal are going to start to move, and as a result we then have an electrical signal produced. So that obviously then travels down the wires to whatever device then decodes said signal. So oscillating potential difference across a wire makes the electrons move backwards and forwards. That produces the changing electric and magnetic field, which is the radio wave. As that radio wave meets a piece of metal, electrons in the metal move and the electrical signal is produced. We need to understand a range of uses of these different electromagnetic waves then. First of all, microwaves. You are familiar with microwaves and their uses whether you know it or not. I would hope we could all say that microwaves are used in a microwave for cooking. It's not just a lie, the name is accurate. But they're also used in your mobile phones, satellites, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, all of those are microwaves. Radio waves, radio and TV, infrared in your remote controls and in optical fibres, and visible light we can use for communication, such as between ships. They used to have this question that came up quite frequently, asking you to compare cooking food between infrared and microwaves. So usually it would be some really thrilling setting like a slice of pizza that you were going to cook. Now, both of them are capable of transferring energy because they're both electromagnetic waves, but they work in slightly different ways, hence why the food takes a different length of time to cook in those two devices. If we think microwaves, they emit microwaves, and the microwaves are absorbed by fat and water within the first few centimetres of the food's depth. The rest of the food is then cooked through conduction as it then passes that energy through to the centre. If we then think about an infrared in our conventional ovens and grills, that's only absorbed by the particles on the very surface of the food. We then have to transfer that energy all the way to the centre by conduction, and that takes longer because remember the microwaves are going a few centimetres in. These ones for our infrared only the outermost surface, everything else is then conduction. So that's why our conventional ovens are slower than microwaves. We can also use light in the form of a laser in our CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, etc. and that just allows us to read the discs. If we think about ultraviolet, this is used by our body to produce vitamin D, which we actually need for strong bones and to avoid a condition called rickets. If we think forensics, UV light is used to detect any forged banknotes and body fluids. And we can also use it to sterilize water by killing the bacteria present in there. X-rays allow us to produce images of bones and they kill cancer cells. And gamma rays we can use to kill bacteria and kill cancer cells. So an array of different uses of our electromagnetic waves there. They also have some dangers associated with them. Ultraviolet, first of all, as much as it does produce our lovely vitamin D, which prevents rickets, if you're exposed to significant quantities of ultraviolet, you can actually damage the DNA in your skin cells, and as a result, you could develop skin cancer. That's why you should wear sun cream. If you have too much exposure to UV light in your eyes, that can lead to cataracts, hence why you should wear proper sunglasses with UV protection in those lenses in very bright conditions. As we said, X-rays we can use to kill cancer cells and to image our bones, but they come with a slight risk here because they can also damage the cells and cause cancer. In order to minimize the risk to those people who actually work in hospitals to take those images of your bones, the radiographer, they stand behind a LED screen or they'll leave the room when they actually take the X-ray to reduce their exposure. Finally, the gamma rays, just be aware that even though we're using them obviously to kill cancer cells, they can also kill or damage normal cells in the body too. It is worth knowing about devices that use these electromagnetic waves in medicine. So the first one is a thermal imaging camera, and that produces something called a thermogram. Quite simply, what we have is a charge coupled device, or CCD, that will absorb infrared radiation and produce an image when it does so. The colours will be added by a computer based on the amount of infrared radiation that was detected. So hotter areas emit more infrared radiation, therefore we tend to give them a colour that represents that. If we think about our X-rays then, the way that works is that bones will absorb X-rays, soft tissue does not absorb X-rays. So what we do is we place a bit of photographic film under the bit of the body we want to X-ray. Therefore, the bones will absorb the X-rays, the soft tissue doesn't. So it means it will pass through any soft tissue onto the photographic film and darken in those areas. Where the bones have absorbed the X-rays, obviously it doesn't darken the photographic film, it stays lighter, we see the bones. So we get that contrast then to let us see the image. We can also use that CCD to detect X-rays. And colours that we apply will show the different densities of the material present. So the higher the density, the more X-rays are absorbed, and this is what we're doing in a CT scan, or a computerized tomography scanner, just to allow us to look into the body without having to actually carry out any surgery. We can also use our gamma rays as something called a tracer. Now, tracers are incredibly useful in both medicine and industry. In medicine, we're going to use it by introducing it to the person by injection, swallowing, or inhalation. And then we can use a scanner to detect where the gamma rays are emitted. So we can then look at that on a computer screen, and obviously the red colours are going to be where there's a large quantity, the blue where there's only a small amount. So that allows us to identify if there is an area where there's a blockage, a leak, or there's something that's not having blood flow properly. So we can work that out without having to carry out any kind of surgery, so very useful. It's a similar idea in terms of industry for using gamma rays as tracers in underground pipes. It's a nightmare when we have roadworks digging up pipe work, so the thought of having to dig up entire sections of pipes until we eventually find a leak would be appalling in terms of disruption. Instead, we can use these gamma rays as a tracer. You then run your detector along the surface, and again we're looking for an increase in an area and then a sudden drop off. That tells us that there is either a blockage or a leak in that zone. We know where to then dig up the road and therefore minimise disruption. If there are bits from today's booster you'd like to look at in more detail, then do head on over to the P5 playlist on the main channel. You can use your revision guides, have a look at some past exam questions from the OCR website, previous exam paper section, And of course, don't forget to join us again tomorrow for the next Daily Booster.